He arrived injured. She healed him. What happened next took everyone's breath away. It was a quiet evening in the small town, the kind of evening where the sun seemed to linger just a little longer before dipping behind the distant hills. Birds were returning to their nests, and the soft hum of the wind through the trees made the town feel peaceful and calm. Most people were settling into their homes, finishing chores or preparing dinner. But at the edge of town, where the road met the wild fields, something unusual was happening. A shadow appeared, slowly moving toward the town. No one knew who it was at first. From a distance, the figure looked fragile and weak, stumbling with every step. As he drew closer, it became clear that he was badly injured. His clothes were torn and stained, and blood marked his arms and legs. His face, though handsome in a rugged way, was pale and lined with pain. Every movement seemed to take great effort, yet he continued moving forward, as if he had no choice but to reach this place. Some townspeople saw him from their windows and felt a mixture of fear and curiosity. They whispered to each other, saying he must be a troublemaker, or maybe a criminal running from the law. Others thought he could be someone in serious danger. But fear is powerful, and most of them chose to close their doors and ignore the figure outside. Nobody wanted to risk getting involved. Among the few who noticed him clearly was a woman named Clara. She lived alone in a modest house near the edge of the town, surrounded by a small garden of flowers and herbs she tended herself. Clara had a quiet life, simple and routine, but she had a heart that could not ignore suffering. When she saw the man struggling, leaning against a fence to catch his breath, something inside her stirred. Compassion overpowered caution. She knew she could not simply watch someone in such pain and do nothing. Clara quickly went inside her home, returning with a warm blanket, a bowl of water, and some clean cloths. She stepped outside carefully, calling softly, "Sir, are you hurt? Can I help you?" The man turned toward her voice, his eyes filled with pain, surprise, and perhaps a hint of hope. He tried to speak, but only a weak, raspy sound came out. Clara realized he might not be able to communicate easily. She gestured gently for him to come closer, and he hesitated, his injuries making every movement difficult. Finally, he collapsed onto the ground near her doorstep. Clara knelt beside him, assessing his wounds. They were serious: bruises, cuts, and a deep gash on his arm that needed immediate attention. She realized she would have to act quickly if he was going to survive the night. With care and patience, she helped him into her home, making sure he was comfortable on a bed she had prepared. She cleaned his wounds as best as she could, using boiled water, cloths, and herbs she had grown herself. As she worked, she noticed that he flinched at certain touches, as if the pain was not just physical but emotional. His eyes darted nervously around the room, taking in every corner, as if expecting danger to come from any direction. Clara understood then that he had been through something terrible, something that left him afraid even when he was safe. She spoke in a calm, soothing voice, telling him it was all right, that he was no longer alone, and that she would take care of him. Night fell outside, and the quiet town seemed to hold its breath. Clara kept watch over him, not sleeping, because she could not risk leaving him alone in his vulnerable state. She noticed small details about him: the way his hands trembled, the way his breathing was uneven, the way his eyes looked both wary and weary. She also noticed a strength beneath the fragility, an inner courage that had carried him through the challenges he faced before arriving at her door. Hours passed, and the man's breathing began to even out. Clara stayed near him, talking softly, telling him about the small town, the people who lived there, and the garden outside her window. She didn't press him for information, knowing that trust could not be rushed. Little by little, he relaxed, his eyes closing occasionally as he rested. Clara kept a blanket over him and made sure he had enough water. She also prepared a small meal, hoping he would be able to eat when he felt strong enough. The next morning, the man awoke to sunlight streaming through the window. He looked around, taking in the simple room, the neat furniture, and the scent of herbs in the air. Clara was nearby, tending her plants, humming softly. For a moment, he simply watched her, taking in the kindness that had brought him back from the edge of despair. He did not yet speak, but his eyes expressed gratitude, a deep, silent thankfulness for someone who had cared when no one else would. Clara offered him food, and he accepted hesitantly. As he ate, he began to regain some strength, though his body was still weak, and every movement reminded him of his injuries. Clara watched over him, noting that he avoided discussing what had happened to him. She did not push, understanding that he needed time. Trust had to be earned, not demanded. Over the next few days, their routines settled into a quiet rhythm. Clara tended his wounds each morning, prepared meals, and sat with him in the evenings, sharing stories about the town and its people. Slowly, the man began to speak in short, broken sentences, revealing fragments of his life. He had traveled far, seeking safety, carrying the weight of loss and hardship. Clara listened without judgment, offering comfort and support instead. Despite the calm of the town around them, tension lingered in the air. Neighbors whispered about the stranger in Clara's home, and curiosity grew into concern. Some wondered if it was safe for her to be helping someone with such visible injuries. Others admired her courage, though they would not say so openly. Clara paid little attention to gossip. Her focus remained on helping the man heal, both physically and emotionally. Days turned into a week, and the man grew stronger. His body began to recover, and his spirit, once shadowed by fear and pain, started to show signs of hope. Clara could see it in the way he looked at the world, more alert and more willing to engage. She also noticed a quiet resilience in him, a determination to survive and to move forward despite everything he had endured. By the end of that first week, a bond had begun to form between them, a bond built on trust, care, and the unspoken understanding of shared humanity. Clara had given him safety when none existed, and he had responded with gratitude, respect, and a quiet sense of loyalty. It was a fragile connection, but one that had the power to grow into something far stronger. Outside, life in the town continued, but the presence of the injured man brought subtle changes. People began to notice Clara's unwavering dedication, and some started to rethink their assumptions about fear, kindness, and courage. Though the man's past remained a mystery, his survival and recovery became a testament to the strength found in compassion. And so, the first part of the story ends with the man beginning to heal, both in body and spirit, and Clara standing by him, not as a savior seeking recognition, but as a woman guided by the simple truth that helping another human being in need is a reward in itself. The night passes peacefully, the quiet of the town settling over them like a protective blanket, and the promise of what comes next hangs in the air, waiting to unfold. After the first week, the man's physical injuries had begun to heal, but the emotional wounds he carried were much deeper. Clara could see it in his eyes. There was a shadow of fear, distrust, and sadness that no amount of bandages could fix. Every movement he made showed caution. Every glance seemed measured, as if he were expecting something terrible to happen at any moment. Clara understood that healing the body was only the first step. The heart and mind needed care too, and that would take much longer. Each morning, Clara prepared a small breakfast and gently encouraged him to eat. At first, he only nibbled at the food, but she remained patient. "Your body needs strength," she would say softly. Even small steps help. Gradually, he began to eat more, and soon the simple act of sharing a meal became a small ritual between them. It was during these quiet moments that they began to communicate more naturally. The man spoke in short sentences at first, often pausing to find the right words, but Clara never rushed him. She listened with attention, giving him space to share when he was ready. One afternoon, while he rested in a chair near the window, Clara brought out some fresh herbs from her garden. "These help the body heal," she said, placing a small bundle of chamomile and mint near him. "They can calm the mind, too." The man looked at the herbs with a faint smile, a gesture so small but so meaningful that Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was the first sign that he was beginning to trust her, and trust, she knew, was the hardest thing for him to give. Days turned into a rhythm of gentle care and quiet conversation. Clara often shared stories about the town, her neighbors, and the small joys of daily life. She spoke of the way the river glimmered in the morning sun, the songs of the birds in spring, and the laughter of children as they played near the fields. The man listened with interest, sometimes asking questions, though his own story remained mostly hidden. Clara did not press. She had learned that the man would reveal his past in his own time. For now, the important thing was that he felt safe and not alone. Despite the calm in Clara's home, the town outside was beginning to take notice. Some people whispered about the injured stranger living with Clara. Rumors spread, fueled by curiosity and fear. Many questioned her judgment. Why would she help a stranger who could be dangerous? They asked. Others secretly admired her courage, though few voiced it aloud. Clara, however, paid little attention to the gossip. Her focus remained entirely on the man in her care, on helping him regain his strength and, more importantly, his trust in people. As the days went by, small gestures began to build a bond between them. The man learned to move around the house without fear of falling or hurting himself, and Clara taught him simple ways to care for minor injuries, wash his clothes, and maintain his strength. There was a quiet sense of partnership developing. It was not yet friendship, not yet love, but a connection built on mutual respect and the recognition of each other's struggles. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, the man finally spoke more about his past. His voice was low and hesitant, but Clara leaned in and listened attentively. He spoke of distant places he had traveled, people he had known, and the tragedies he had endured. He had once lived a life full of hope, but betrayal and loss had left him broken. Clara did not judge him, she only offered understanding and reassurance. "You are safe here," she said softly. "You don't have to hide anymore." Hearing these words seemed to calm him. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to rest fully, closing his eyes without fear. Clara stayed by his side, watching over him like a guardian, knowing that her presence alone brought a measure of peace. The trust between them deepened, though it was still fragile. The man had been hurt by people he once trusted, and it would take time for him to fully believe in kindness again. The bond between them grew stronger in small ways. He began to help Clara with simple tasks around the house. He carried firewood, fetched water from the well, and even helped in the garden. Each action, though modest, reflected a growing sense of responsibility and gratitude. Clara encouraged him, praising his efforts and reminding him that even small contributions mattered. These shared activities became a quiet ritual, creating a sense of normalcy and stability for both of them. One afternoon, Clara decided to take the man outside for a short walk. The world beyond the house had been unfamiliar to him, filled with potential threats. At first, he was hesitant, moving slowly and carefully. Clara held his arm gently, guiding him, speaking words of reassurance. Step by step, he began to relax. The fresh air, the warmth of the sun, and the simple beauty of the fields began to bring a subtle change. He noticed the green of the trees, the soft rustle of leaves, and the distant sound of children playing. For a moment, he allowed himself to forget his pain and fear. These small experiences outside the house were important. They reminded him that life could still be beautiful, even after tragedy. They also showed him that he was not alone, that someone cared enough to help him find hope again. Clara watched him carefully, sensing the change in his demeanor. It was slow and gradual, but it was happening. The man was beginning to reconnect with the world, and with people, in a way he had not done in a long time. Nighttime continued to be a quiet period of reflection. Clara and the man often sat together by the window, watching the stars emerge one by one. They spoke softly, sharing thoughts, hopes, and simple observations about the world around them. The man's voice grew stronger, his sentences longer, as he became more comfortable expressing himself. Clara never interrupted or judged. She only offered a listening ear and a calm presence. Despite the peace inside Clara's home, there were occasional reminders of the outside world's dangers. The man flinched at sudden noises, wary of strangers passing near the house. Clara understood that his caution was a survival instinct, a habit formed from years of hardship. She reassured him gently, telling him that he was safe now, that danger was no longer following him. Over time, he began to believe her, though always with a hint of caution. As the second week passed, their connection deepened further. They shared meals, chores, and quiet moments, slowly building trust and understanding. Clara noticed that he smiled more often, laughed quietly at small jokes, and seemed genuinely interested in the world around him. It was a transformation born from patience, care, and the simple act of someone believing in him when he had lost faith in others. By the end of the second week, it was clear that the man had begun to heal not only physically, but emotionally. The shadow of fear that had marked his first days in the town had begun to lift, replaced by a cautious optimism. Clara, too, felt a change within herself. The act of helping another human being, of seeing someone rise from despair, had brought a sense of purpose and fulfillment she had never known before. The bond between them remained delicate, but it was growing stronger. They had moved from strangers to companions, connected by empathy, trust, and shared experiences. The man was learning to trust again, slowly, step by step. Clara was learning the profound impact of kindness, patience, and understanding. Together, they were discovering that even in a world full of hardships, human connection could bring healing, hope, and the possibility of a better future. And so, the second part of the story ends with the man continuing his journey of recovery, both in body and spirit. Clara remains by his side, guiding, supporting, and offering a safe space where trust and friendship can grow. Outside the walls of the small house, life goes on, but inside, something remarkable is happening. Two lives intertwining in quiet courage, patience, and the beginning of hope for what comes next. By the time the third week arrived, the man had regained most of his physical strength, though scars remained on his arms, chest, and face, a reminder of the hardships he had endured. Clara noticed these scars every day, but she did not see them as marks of weakness. She saw them as signs of survival. Each scar told a story of courage, endurance, and resilience. The man, however, rarely spoke of how he received these wounds. There was a quiet sadness in his eyes, a past too heavy to share easily. Clara understood that he would reveal his story when he was ready, and she continued to offer patience and support. One morning, as the sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, the man finally began to speak more openly. His voice was calm but tinged with emotion. He told Clara about a life that had once been full of purpose and hope. He had a family, friends, and a home that he loved dearly. But everything had changed in an instant. Betrayal, violence, and loss had shattered his world. He spoke in broken sentences, his words halting as memories pressed on him, but Clara listened without interruption. Her presence alone provided comfort, allowing him to speak without fear of judgment or rejection. Clara had learned by now that healing was not just about tending to physical wounds. Emotional recovery required understanding, trust, and a safe environment. She encouraged him to take small steps each day, whether it was walking through the fields, helping in the garden, or simply sitting outside in the sunlight. Slowly, he began to enjoy these moments, noticing the warmth of the sun on his face, the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind, and the distant songs of birds. Each day brought a small victory, a sign that he was beginning to trust life again. Even as he regained confidence, moments of fear and hesitation still appeared. Loud noises, sudden movements, or the sight of strangers walking near the house sometimes made him tense or flinch. Clara never scolded him or expressed frustration. Instead, she offered gentle reassurance. "You are safe now," she would say. "Nothing here will harm you." Her calm voice and steady presence helped him slowly release the tension that had become a part of his everyday life. As they spent more time together, the man began to show small acts of gratitude. He would fetch water for Clara without being asked, carry firewood to warm the house, or help in her small garden. These gestures, though simple, were powerful. They showed that he was not just recovering physically, but emotionally as well. He was beginning to see himself not as a helpless victim, but as a person capable of contributing and caring. Clara encouraged these actions, praising his efforts and reminding him that every small act mattered. The bond between them deepened through shared experiences. They cooked meals together, tending to the fire and chopping vegetables, sometimes laughing at small mistakes or unexpected spills. They cleaned the house together, arranged flowers in vases, and repaired minor damages. Even mundane tasks became opportunities for connection, allowing them to understand each other without words. The man began to look forward to these moments, finding comfort in the rhythm of everyday life and in Clara's steady presence. One afternoon, Clara decided to take him further into the fields than before. They walked along a small path that led to a gentle stream, the water sparkling under the midday sun. The man paused at the edge, looking down at the clear water, mesmerized by its calm flow. Clara handed him a small branch to gently stir the surface, and he smiled faintly, enjoying the simple pleasure. "It's peaceful here," he said quietly. I forgot what peace felt like." Clara nodded, understanding the weight behind his words. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to experience serenity without fear. As the days continued, fragments of his past began to surface more clearly. He shared small stories of people he had known, moments of happiness and dreams that had once been his. Clara listened, often encouraging him to speak, but never pressing for details he was not ready to reveal. Each story he told was a step toward healing, a way of reclaiming pieces of his life that had been lost. She realized that the act of listening and acknowledging his experiences was just as important as tending to his physical injuries. Despite the progress, there were challenges. The man sometimes withdrew into silence, staring out the window for hours, lost in thought. Clara learned to give him space during these times, understanding that reflection was part of the healing process. She would sit quietly nearby, working on her own tasks, ready to offer support when he was ready to speak again. This balance of presence and distance created a safe environment where he could rebuild trust not only in others but in himself. During this period, Clara noticed changes in the man's demeanor. He began to take initiative, suggesting tasks, sharing opinions, and even making small decisions on his own. The confidence in his eyes grew, and with it, a sense of pride and self-respect. It was a gradual transformation, but one that Clara cherished. She realized that her role was not just to help him survive, but to empower him to live fully again. The town continued to watch, though from a distance. Some neighbors remained skeptical, unsure if a stranger could truly be trusted. Others admired Clara's courage and compassion, though they said little. Gradually, however, the man's presence began to change perceptions. People noticed the small improvements in his health and demeanor, and they began to see him not as a threat, but as someone who had endured hardship and survived. Clara's unwavering dedication to him became a quiet lesson for the town about empathy, kindness, and courage. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, the man spoke more openly about his fears. I, I never thought I could feel safe again, he admitted. Clara placed a hand gently on his arm. You are safe now, she said softly. It's okay to let go of fear little by little. He nodded, taking a deep breath, and for the first time in a long while allowed himself to truly relax. They spent long hours talking about simple things, the changing seasons, the beauty of the fields, and the quiet joys of daily life. The man learned to laugh again, sometimes softly, sometimes with a lightness that surprised him. Clara shared her own stories, speaking of childhood memories, lessons learned, and the small wonders she had found in life. These exchanges created a sense of normalcy and comfort, a foundation for the trust and connection that continued to grow between them. One morning, the man woke early and went outside alone. Clara noticed him standing by the garden, breathing in the crisp morning air, watching the sunlight filter through the trees. He looked at ease, more relaxed than she had ever seen him. When she approached, he smiled faintly. "Thank you," he said simply. Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. These two words, though small, carried immense meaning. They reflected not only gratitude but recognition of the trust and bond that had formed between them. As the third week drew to a close, it became clear that the man was beginning to reclaim his life. His body was stronger, his mind calmer, and his spirit slowly mending. Clara had become more than a caregiver. She was a companion, a trusted friend, and a steady presence in his life. He, in turn, was learning to trust, to hope, and to believe that kindness could exist even after suffering. And yet, beneath this sense of healing, there remained a quiet tension. The past he carried was still heavy, and Clara knew that sooner or later he would have to confront the events that had brought him to her doorstep. For now, however, the focus was on recovery, trust, and the slow rebuilding of a life that had been shattered. Together, they continued this delicate process, step by step, learning that healing was not a destination, but a journey, one that required patience, courage, and the unwavering belief that human connection could overcome even the deepest wounds. By the end of this period, the man had transformed in ways small and large. He could walk confidently, perform daily tasks, and speak openly about his feelings and fears. Most importantly, he had begun to trust again, not just Clara, but the world outside her home. Clara, too, had grown, realizing that the act of helping another human being could create bonds stronger than fear, and that patience, empathy, and care were powerful tools for transformation. The third part of the story ends with a sense of quiet triumph. The man had faced the first major stage of recovery, and Clara had helped him navigate it with compassion and wisdom. Outside, the town remained as it had always been, but inside Clara's home, a life was being rebuilt, a life full of trust, hope, and the possibility of something extraordinary to come. The next steps would be more challenging, but both of them were ready to face them together, stronger than before, connected by shared experience and the promise of a brighter future. By the time the fourth week arrived, the man's recovery had progressed far beyond what anyone might have expected. He moved with confidence now, walked without fear, and even began to help Clara more actively with chores around the house and garden. But healing was never a straight path. The man's past, filled with shadows of betrayal and danger, was never far from his mind. Clara knew that the calm they had enjoyed could be tested at any moment. The quiet town might have seemed peaceful, but danger often comes quietly, and the man's enemies, or the memories of them, still lingered in the background. One morning, as Clara was preparing breakfast, she noticed the man staring out the window, his expression tense and alert. "What is it?" she asked gently, setting down the bowl of porridge she had just made. He shook his head slowly, not wanting to speak at first. After a moment, he finally said, "I think someone may have followed me here." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She had known this day might come, though she had hoped it would be much later. "We will face it together," she said calmly. "You are not alone anymore." For the first time, the man realized that he did not have to fight his battles alone. Clara's presence had been a constant source of strength, and now it became a shield against the fears that had haunted him for so long. They began to plan carefully, thinking about ways to protect the home and themselves. Windows were checked, doors were secured, and a careful watch was kept on anyone entering the nearby roads. Clara's calm and practical approach helped the man regain a sense of control he had not felt in years. As days passed, the tension grew. Strange sounds at night, the rustling of leaves, distant footsteps and shadows that moved along the fences, made the man restless. Clara remained by his side, speaking softly, reassuring him that they were prepared. "We cannot control everything," she reminded him one evening, "but we can stay ready, and that is enough." Her words grounded him, helping to steady his nerves and focus on the practical steps they could take. Despite the looming tension, life inside the house continued. They shared meals, tended the garden, and spent quiet hours talking about small joys, flowers blooming, birds singing, and the simple beauty of a sunrise. These moments were precious, offering a sense of normalcy amid the uncertainty outside. They laughed together over minor mishaps, like spilling water or dropping vegetables, and these small joys strengthened the bond between them. It was in these simple, everyday acts that they discovered courage, hope, and resilience. One afternoon, the man decided to venture farther from the house than before. Clara accompanied him, both for safety and for support. They walked along a path through the fields, the sun warm on their shoulders and the wind gentle against their faces. "It is strange," the man said quietly. "I can feel life again, and yet I cannot forget the past." Clara nodded, understanding the weight of his words. Healing does not erase memory. It allows a person to carry it without being destroyed. She squeezed his hand, offering silent support. As the days continued, the presence of others in the town began to shift subtly. Some neighbors, once wary of the injured stranger, noticed the calm and confidence he now displayed. Slowly, perceptions began to change. Stories of Clara's courage and the man's transformation spread quietly through the town. People whispered not about fear, but admiration. They began to see the man not as a threat but as someone who had endured suffering and survived, and Clara as a woman whose compassion could change lives. However, the calm could not last forever. One evening, a stranger appeared near the edge of Clara's property. The man saw him first and immediately recognized the signs of danger. Someone had come looking for him. His heart pounded, and memories of past betrayals and violence returned sharply. Clara noticed his tension and stayed close, her presence steadying him. "We will face this," she said softly, "together." The man prepared himself, gathering what little weapons and tools they had for protection. Clara helped him, moving with a quiet determination that surprised him. Together they approached the stranger cautiously, speaking in calm, steady tones. The stranger, taken aback by their preparedness and courage, hesitated. It was a moment of quiet power, the man no longer the frightened survivor, but someone capable of defending himself with Clara by his side. This confrontation marked a turning point. The man realized that he could face his past without running, without fear. Clara's unwavering support gave him the strength to stand firm, to confront danger directly, and to protect not only himself but also the woman who had become his anchor. Together, they stood their ground, showing courage that would have been impossible alone. In the following days, life returned to a cautious normalcy. The man continued to strengthen his body and mind, now more aware than ever that survival depended not just on escaping danger, but on facing it when necessary. Clara remained his constant support, offering guidance, comfort, and encouragement. They worked together on chores, walked in the fields, and shared stories, each day reinforcing their bond. The The townspeople began to respect the man more openly. They noticed the change in his demeanor, the way he moved confidently, spoke kindly, and contributed quietly to the life of the town. Clara's role was also acknowledged, though often in whispers. She had transformed a life through patience, courage, and compassion. Together, they became a living example of trust, resilience, and human connection. Even with the progress, the man knew that there would always be moments of uncertainty. The past could return, and danger could appear unexpectedly. But now, he faced these possibilities with clarity and strength. He had learned that fear was not a weakness but a guide, a warning that could be acknowledged and managed with preparation, courage, and support. Clara had taught him that survival was not just about avoiding danger, but about living fully despite it. One evening, as they sat together outside the house, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, the man spoke softly. "I never thought I could feel this calm," he admitted. Clara smiled, placing a hand on his arm. "Calm comes from knowing you are not alone," she said. "You have learned to trust again, and that is a powerful thing." The man nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle within him. The days that followed were filled with small victories and quiet achievements. They repaired parts of the house that had needed attention, planted new flowers in the garden, and tended to their small animals. Each task, though ordinary, became an affirmation of life and hope. The man began to dream again, imagining a future where he could live without fear, contribute to the community, and build a life with purpose and meaning. Despite these peaceful moments, Clara and the man remained vigilant. They knew that the world beyond their home could be unpredictable, and they prepared quietly for any challenges that might arise. Their teamwork, trust, and courage created a protective bubble within which they could continue to heal. The man's confidence grew, and Clara's patience and wisdom became an inseparable part of his strength. By the end of the fourth week, the transformation was clear. The man had moved from a fragile, frightened figure into someone capable of facing challenges, with courage and determination. Clara had played a crucial role in this transformation, guiding him gently, supporting him unwaveringly, and helping him reclaim not only his strength but also his sense of purpose. Together they had faced the tension of the past, confronted danger, and built a foundation for the future. And so, the fourth part of the story ends with a sense of quiet triumph. The man is no longer merely surviving. He is living, growing, and preparing to face the next chapter of his life. Clara stands by him, steady and strong, a reminder that compassion and trust can create strength greater than fear. The small town continues its rhythms, unaware of the extraordinary journey unfolding at its edge, where two lives are intertwined by courage, patience, and the quiet power of human connection. By the time the fifth week arrived, the man had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. He walked with confidence, spoke with calm authority, and carried himself with a quiet dignity. His body had healed from the injuries that had brought him to Clara's door, but more importantly, his heart and mind had begun to heal. The fears that once dominated his every thought had been replaced with a growing sense of hope and trust. Yet, the journey was far from over. There were still moments when memories of the past surfaced, when shadows of betrayal crept back into his mind. But now, he faced them not with despair, but with courage and with Clara by his side. Clara, too, had changed. The woman who had once lived a quiet, solitary life had discovered a new purpose. Her compassion, patience, and unwavering belief in the man's potential had not only saved his life, but had also created a bond that could not be broken. She had shown him that kindness was not weakness, that trust could be rebuilt, and that two people together could face even the most difficult challenges. Their relationship had grown beyond caregiver and patient, beyond friendship. It had become a partnership of respect, understanding, and quiet devotion. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, the man stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The town was just beginning to stir, and the golden light of dawn illuminated the fields, the trees, and the little paths he had come to know so well. He felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for the life he had been given, but for the woman who had stood by him every step of the way. Clara joined him outside, carrying a small basket of fresh herbs from the garden. They stood together in silence for a moment, enjoying the simple beauty of the day. "I never thought I could feel this free again," he said quietly, his voice carrying both wonder and disbelief. Clara smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Freedom begins with trust," she replied. "You have found it within yourself, and now it can guide you forward." The man nodded, understanding the truth in her words. He had survived danger, endured hardship, and faced the darkest parts of his past. Now he had something more powerful than fear. He had hope, resilience, and the unwavering presence of someone who believed in him. As the day progressed, the man took on more responsibilities around the house and garden. He carried water, tended the small vegetable patch, and even repaired a fence that had been weakened by storms. Each action, though ordinary, felt extraordinary because it marked a return to life and purpose. Clara watched him with quiet pride, realizing that he was no longer merely surviving, he was thriving. Their shared work strengthened not only the home but also their connection, a bond built on trust, respect, and mutual care. The townspeople had begun to notice the change as well. Those who had once whispered doubts and fears about the stranger now looked upon him with admiration and respect. They saw a man who had faced adversity, who had survived, and who had grown stronger not through violence or revenge, but through resilience, patience, and the quiet support of a compassionate woman. Clara's role was equally recognized, though she remained humble, insisting that she had only done what any person would do for someone in need. Yet, the townspeople knew that her courage had changed lives, starting with the man at her doorstep. One afternoon, as the man was repairing part of the garden fence, a small group of children approached, curious and cautious. He smiled at them, a genuine smile that reflected the peace he had begun to feel. The children hesitated, then cautiously greeted him. He responded with kindness, showing them simple tools and how to plant seeds in the garden. Clara watched from the porch, seeing how his patience, gentleness, and confidence had grown. This interaction, small as it seemed, was proof that he was no longer burdened solely by his past. He could now connect with others, share knowledge, and offer guidance without fear. That evening, a gentle calm settled over the house. The man and Clara sat together near the fireplace, sharing stories and quietly reflecting on the journey they had undertaken. The man spoke of dreams he had long abandoned, dreams of a future filled with peace, purpose, and connection. Clara listened, encouraging him to envision a life that he had once thought impossible. "You have been through so much," she said softly, "but the future is still yours to shape. You are stronger now, and you do not have to face it alone." For the first time in years, the man allowed himself to truly imagine a life beyond survival. He saw himself contributing to the community, helping others in need, and building a life filled with meaning. He imagined small joys, planting in the garden, walking through the fields, sharing meals with friends, and laughing freely without fear. And always, he imagined Clara by his side, a steady presence and a partner in this new chapter of life. Their bond deepened further over the following days. They began to plan small projects for the house and garden, discussing improvements, sharing ideas, and working together as equals. The man's confidence continued to grow, not only in his abilities but in his capacity to trust others. He had learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it, and that human connection can provide strength far greater than one can find alone. Then came a moment that would mark a turning point in their journey. One afternoon, while walking along the path to the stream, the man paused and looked toward the horizon. "I want to stay," he said quietly. Clara turned to him, her heart swelling with emotion. "Stay?" she asked. He nodded. "I was afraid at first, afraid to trust, afraid to hope. But now I see that life can be more than survival. I want to live fully, and I want to live it with you." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had hoped for this moment, though she had never pressured him or expected it to come quickly. "Then stay," she said softly. "We can face whatever comes next together." The man smiled, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and quiet joy shining in his eyes. In that moment, everything they had worked toward, the trust, the courage, the patience, and the care, culminated in a shared understanding. They would face life side by side, no longer defined by fear but by hope and connection. In the days that followed, the man began to integrate fully into the life of the town. He helped neighbors with repairs, shared his knowledge of the land, and offered assistance wherever it was needed. The townspeople, once wary, now looked upon him as a source of strength and reliability. Clara watched with quiet pride, knowing that their journey together had not only transformed him, but also created a ripple effect in the community. Their story became one of courage, trust, and the power of human kindness. The evening of the fifth week arrived with a sky painted in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The man and Clara sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "I never imagined life could feel this full," he said quietly. Clara reached for his hand, holding it gently. "It is full," she replied. "Because you chose to trust, because you chose to heal, and because we faced it all together." He nodded, a tear of gratitude glistening in his eye. That night, as they prepared for bed, a sense of peace settled over the house. The man had faced the darkness of his past, survived the trials of recovery, and emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace life. Clara had guided him through every step, offering unwavering support, understanding, and compassion. Together they had created a bond that could not be broken, a connection built on trust, patience, and the shared journey of transformation. The town, too, would remember their story. Not as a tale of fear or danger, but as a testament to the power of kindness, courage, and human connection. People would speak of the injured man who came at dusk, the woman who healed him, and the extraordinary partnership that emerged from simple acts of compassion. Their journey inspired others to believe in the possibility of hope, even in the darkest of times. And so, the story concludes with the man and Clara standing together at the edge of the fields, looking toward the future. The wounds of the past were not forgotten, but they no longer held power over their lives. They had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, and emerged stronger, united, and ready to embrace the possibilities that lay ahead. Life, once fragile and uncertain, had become a canvas upon which they could build, dream, and live fully, side by side, with trust, courage, and love as their guide. The man had arrived injured, broken, and weary, but through the healing hands and compassionate heart of Clara, he had not only survived, he had truly lived. And in the quiet town, where the fields stretched endlessly and the sun rose and set in gentle rhythm, everyone who knew their story would take a breath and marvel at the extraordinary power of trust, hope, and human kindness.